Russia will win this war in 2026. That was Vladimir Putin's promise. Minutes later, the sky over Ukraine said something very different. 72 caliber missiles, over 300 drones, all inbound. On paper, it was enough to shut down entire regions, power, logistics, command centers, all at once. Inside a dim command room, radar screens flooded with targets. No chatter, no panic, just numbers climbing fast. It looked like the strike that would finally break Ukraine. But Ukraine had already been watching. For the last 30 minutes, they had tracked not just the missiles, but the launch systems behind them. In less than 6 minutes, the sky would turn into a wall of fire. And what followed would begin to unravel the very narrative Putin had built. So here's the real question. Does this prove Russia was right? Or is this the moment everything starts to fall apart? The numbers told a very different story from Putin's promise. Over the last 6 months, Russian forces had captured roughly 2,300 square kilometers of territory, a noticeable drop from the previous year, even as the intensity of attacks increased. More missiles, more drones, more casualties, but less progress. In March alone, Russia launched some of its largest coordinated assaults of the war. Waves of over 1,000 drones and missiles combined, targeting both infrastructure and frontline defenses. And still, the front barely moved. Ukraine, meanwhile, had changed the rules. Satellite feeds updated every few seconds. AI-assisted targeting flagged patterns in Russian launch behavior. Mid-range drones pushed deeper into occupied territory, nearly 3 times farther than earlier strike systems. They weren't just intercepting attacks anymore. They were mapping the entire system behind them. Fuel depots, air defense nodes, command centers, everything connected. On a secure screen inside Kyiv, a network diagram pulsed with live data. Each Russian launch point lighting up in sequence. Then came the shift. Instead of reacting, Ukraine started predicting. Namaste, and once you can predict the attack, you can hit back before it even lands. At 4:18 a.m., one command was sent across multiple units. Execute. 04:19 a.m. The first wave hit Ukrainian radar range. Contact confirmed. Multiple vectors. Speed, subsonic, and closing. On the screen, dozens of caliber missiles cut low across the terrain, hugging the ground. Behind them, a swarm of drones followed, slower but harder to track in numbers. Inside the air defense network, systems came alive. NASAMS batteries locked first. IRIS-T units followed seconds later. S-300 radars swept wide, searching for gaps. Engage. The sky lit up. Missiles launched in rapid succession. White trails cutting through the darkness. 1, 3, 7 interceptors climbing at once. First impact. A caliber disappeared in a mid-air fireball. Then another, then 3 more in quick sequence. Fragments rained down across empty fields. But the swarm didn't stop. Drones pushed forward, low and scattered, forcing Ukraine's systems to split attention. Operators had seconds to choose targets. Prioritize cruise missiles. Let the drones come closer. A risky call. Seconds later, 2 missiles slipped through. One slammed into a power substation, a flash of white, then darkness across several kilometers. Another hit a logistics hub, secondary explosions rippling outward as stored fuel ignited. On the ground, shockwaves rolled through steel and concrete. But in the air, the balance was shifting. Interceptors were getting faster, locks were cleaner, fewer targets were getting through. Because this wasn't just defense anymore. Ukrainian systems were now tracking the trajectory backward, calculating origin points in real time. Launch zones, coordinates, patterns. On a secondary screen, new markers appeared. Not inbound, but outbound. Targets inside Russian-controlled territory. The operators saw it instantly. This wasn't just about surviving the strike. It was about turning it around. But just as the first wave began to thin out, a new alert flashed across the system. Second wave detected. And this one was bigger. 04:26 a.m. While the second wave of Russian missiles was still forming in the sky, Ukraine had already moved to Phase 2. Targets confirmed. Coordinates locked. Authorized strike. Hodoti. This time the movement wasn't defensive. It was outbound. Dozens of Ukrainian FPV drones lifted off from concealed positions. Small, fast, almost invisible on radar. Behind them, larger mid-range strike drones climbed higher, carrying heavier payloads. And above it all, one more layer. Anti-radiation missiles. Designed for one purpose: hunt the radar. Inside Russian-controlled territory, air defense crews barely had time to react. Unknown signals detected. Low altitude, multiple contacts. Mol, too many, too fast. The first FPV drones hit the outer perimeter, slamming into surveillance equipment and forward sensors. Screens flickered, signals dropped. Then the real strike came. One anti-radiation missile locked onto an active radar beam and followed it straight to the source. Impact. A fireball tore through the battery position. The radar went dark. And with it, the entire defensive grid began to unravel. Without radar guidance, Russian air defense systems started firing blind. Missiles launched into empty sky, chasing ghosts created by electronic interference and decoys. In less than 10 minutes, millions of dollars in missiles were wasted for targets that didn't exist. Then came the secondary hits. Ukrainian drones pushed deeper. One struck an ammunition depot. A sharp flash followed by a chain of explosions that rolled across the site like thunder. Another hit a fuel storage area. Flames climbed high into the night, thick smoke spreading across nearby positions. Supply lines, already strained, took another hit. From above, the battlefield looked different now. Less organized, less controlled, more chaotic. Because Ukraine wasn't just attacking positions, they were attacking the system itself. Cheap drones, flexible tactics, real-time intelligence, against rigid defenses built on outdated assumptions. In under 15 minutes, Ukraine had erased an entire layer of Russia's battlefield awareness for a fraction of the cost. And now, the second wave of Russian missiles was still in the air. But the shield behind them was already gone. By sunrise, the battlefield had gone quiet, but the numbers told the real story. Russian forces had launched one of their largest combined strikes of 2026, over 1,000 aerial threats in a single coordinated assault. And yet, the results fell short. Ukrainian defenses intercepted the majority of incoming missiles. The few that got through caused damage, power outages, destroyed facilities, but not the strategic collapse Moscow had hoped for. In return, Ukraine's counterstrike hit harder than expected. Multiple air defense systems were disabled, ammunition depots destroyed, fuel reserves burned through the night. Across the front, Russian advances continued to slow, even as casualties climbed past 30,000 in March alone. At the same time, Ukraine reclaimed additional territory in key sectors, forcing Russia to divert troops away from its main offensive lines. Less momentum, more losses, fewer options. And behind it all, a pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Cheap systems were defeating expensive ones. Speed was beating scale, adaptation was beating doctrine. On paper, Russia still had the larger force. But on the battlefield, Ukraine was learning faster. And in modern war, that changes everything. Because if small, flexible systems can dismantle billion-dollar defenses today, what happens when they become even smarter tomorrow? The smoke cleared, the front held. So, but the balance of the war had shifted, not in one explosion, but in how the fight itself was being rewritten.